సభాధ్యక్షులు, మిత్రులు, ఆచార్యులు హరగోపాల్ గారు, మిత్రులు ఆచార్యులు మాడభూషి శ్రీధర్, ఆచార్యులు మనోరంజన్ మహంతి, ఆచార్యులు డిఎన్ వెంకటేశ్వరరావు గారు. ఒక విచిత్రం, నేను సుప్రీంకోర్టులో ఉన్నప్పుడు నా ముందర వాదించిన ఒక కక్షిదారు హిమాంశు ఈజ్ ఆల్సో హియర్. హీ వాజ్ వన్ ఆఫ్ ద పిటిషనర్. I used to see him in the court, and after perhaps 15 years I see him now. Professor Lakshman, ladies and gentlemen, today is International Adivasi Day. Yesterday in the afternoon, I have suddenly fallen ill. In the sense, the seasonal flu, cold, cough. I sent a message to Professor Lakshman. That I would not be able to come. Prompt comes an order from the President at 9:23 p.m. Sir, I am told you are not well. Speedy recovery. My good wishes. But it would be better if we can draft something and send it across. The message was loud and clear. Even if you are not well, please come to the meeting. And followed by that, at 9:30, because my stenographers lives around somewhere near my house, I had to call that lady at about 9:45, sit in the night, write my brief, because it is an International Adivasi Day where distinguished scholars are present, equally distinguished audience are here. Then I have requested Lakshman, I have prepared something. Would you kindly read it out? He said, చదువుతా కానీ మీరు వస్తే బాగుంటుంది సార్. అంతవరకు బాగానే ఉంది. చిన్న సవరణ ఏం చేస్తాడు ఆయన అంటే, మీరు రండి, మీరు కూర్చోండి, నేను చదువుతాను. సరే, నేను ఇప్పటివరకు వచ్చినాక నేను మాట్లాడేది తీసిపెట్టి మరి నేను వచ్చింది ఎందుకు, కూర్చునేది ఎందుకు? This is just a prelude to the meeting. మిత్రుడు అంటే పౌర హక్కుల సంఘం ఏపీసీఎల్సీ, ఎప్పుడో కనబ్రాన్ బాలగోపాల్, అప్పటి నుంచి ఆన్ అండ్ ఆఫ్ whenever they were directing me to come, I used to come and participate, express my views. Having regard to that affinity, I wanted to make a suggestion to APCLC and to its president and other office bearers. We are living in difficult times. Discipline is the most important thing. And cultivate the habit of speaking within the framework. Don't mix it up. Therefore, I'll confine to the topic social justice and Adivasis, the repression against them, historical reasons. I will not utter a word about the persons who are living, because this is not a program or a meeting to replace somebody or bring somebody else. That's a different story. If we have to talk about it, we will talk about it. It is the high time that if we don't follow these principles, not only you, but the people associated, including the invitees, would be in problem. And that is for nothing. Not that we are worried. At this age, 1 foot in grave, we are not worried about it. But what are we trying to convey to the future generations? How to conduct ourselves? What is a framework supposed to be? How do we disseminate the knowledge and information to the people who are sitting here? అంటాం కదా, చెప్పేవాడికి వినేవాడు లోకు అని. But just because you are sitting here, I can't take you people for granted and speak whatever I wanted to speak. Anyhow, little bit deviation because it's among the friends. Now I will briefly deal with the subject, very hurriedly prepared, having regard to, I said, the diktat from the professor, who is the president of the meet. There was no alternative for me except to comply with it. And I have a lot of personal regard and respect for him. All these things, plus the cause itself, compelled me to stand before you and say a few words. At the very outset, let me unhesitatingly state that it's a great honor that has been bestowed upon me by asking me to speak on this occasion of International Adivasi Day. I will unequivocally state that this is more because I was of the constitutional position that I held rather than any intrinsic merit. At the same time, I must state that it is extremely gratifying to see and participate in such discussions. Given the state of public discourse in the mainstream media and how it has stopped being a mirror to the power that be and the problems with the social media, it is heartening to see that there are many who will still insist that there be a public discourse regarding injustice meted out both historically as well as in contemporary times to vast swaths of our fellow citizens. వినబడుతుందా మీకు? The issues confronting forest dwellers of the Indian subcontinent, who are also to be thought of as an indigenous people, and I would add, representing a variety of original indigenous ways of life, are very ancient and still unrectified over time. Unrectified, of course, in their physical forms, but also unrectified in epistemic, metaphysical, and ethical frames that inform our social action, both as groups of people as well as individuals. The primordial problem is a combination of animosities generated by illicit desire to plunder the earth, both expansively and intensively, as well as think of the tribes, indigenous people, and their culture as quote unquote the others, who are both lesser and potential enemies, as well as those who are not to be treated as protected by notions of justice. The injustices perpetrated against the tribals and forest dwellers is, of course, not unique to India. Like in much of the rest of the world, the establishment and expansion of alleged quote unquote civilizations based on Bronze Age tools and settled agriculture and a formation of the political state brought about great grief and suffering to the forest dwellers, and they were systematically targeted, particularly to bring land under cultivation. Scholars such as Tejram Sharma, Ashwini Agarwal, Joseph Squadberg, and even R.C. Majumdar extensively discuss, for instance, evidence regarding the wars waged by Emperor Samudragupta against the tribes such as Malavas from Rajasthan, Arjunayanas, possibly in what is now Delhi, Agra, Jaipur triangle, Yaidheyas, Madrakas, possibly from Ravi and Chinab region, Abhiyaras from Western India, and many more. Well before the Guptas, forests were treated by the Mauryas as valuable sources of elephants for purposes of war and timber and other resources. This naturally brought them into conflict with the forest dwellers, who the Mauryans viewed with suspicion. They were historical researchers say controlled with bribes or subjugation. These two methods were used even in those days. Mr. Rangarajan, in his India's Wildlife History notes that legal restrictions of such centralized empires often went against hitherto freely exercised rights and practices of indigenous people. మీరు తర్వాత మాట్లాడుతుంది మమ్మల్ని మాట్లాడండి ప్లీజ్ మెయింటైన్ సంథింగ్ వీఆర్ టాకింగ్ సంథింగ్ వెరీ సీరియస్ హియర్. While overt acts of violence of the state are clearly marked, what is less marked but nevertheless vastly more damaging has been what is called controversially as settler genocide. Often thought of as a byproduct of settler colonialism, indigenous people and cultures are replaced by people of different socio-cultural ethnicity. A consequence of this permanent settlement by new ethnic groups is often the elimination of existing residents and the destruction of their society. Raphael Lemkin, the Polish Jewish lawyer, all of you know, who coined the expression genocide, viewed this process as comprising of two steps. One, the destruction of the indigenous group's way of life. Two, imposition of settlers' way of life, thereby eliminating the possibility of the original groups identifying themselves as their way of life or their self-interest as opposed to or being different from the dominant settler groups. Raphael Lemkin's conception of genocide goes far beyond what the United Nations adopted. Lemkin's conception was that we should view as a genocidal, irrespective of whether the attempt to eliminate the identified and independent existence of an ethnic group is by violence or strictly cultural, psychological. Lemkin himself explained. A small quote, I seek your permission to read it. New conceptions require new terms. By genocide, we mean the destruction of a nation or of an ethnic group, coined to denote an old practice in its modern development, is made from the ancient Greek word genos. Genos actually means race or tribe. And the Latin word side is killing. Generally speaking, genocide does not mean the immediate destruction of a nation, except when accomplished by mass killings of all members of a nation. It is intended rather to signify a rather coordinated plan or different actions aiming at the essential foundations of the life of specific ethnic groups. With the aim of annihilating the group itself, the objective of such a plan would be the disintegration of the political and social institutions of culture, language, religion, and the economic existence of those groups, and the destruction of their personal security, liberty, health, dignity, and even the lives of the individuals belonging to such groups. Genocide is directed against the group as an entity, and the actions involved are directed against the individuals, not in their individual capacity, but as members of the group. This is what Lemkin said. I unquote. Many examples of this process can be given. British colonization of Ireland, cultural genocide in Scandinavia with the imposition of assimilation policies on indigenous people such as Sami, Quen, and Finnish. Nazi German policies towards Eastern Europe, which some scholars say was modeled after the American expansion of westward and its ideology of quote-unquote manifest destiny. Indigenous people of America. The list is endless. How we identify many of the same kinds of trends, or even newer forms that threaten the existence of any ethnic tribal group, as a social entity by identifying both the group level discrimination and individual level actions within the geographical and political context of our choice and emotional connect. There is much to research and learn. Attempts at describing the extreme destructive processes unleashed by the elite centric economic development are often met with both social hostility as well as state supported persecution of the scholars engaged in such research. What was rather surprising for me was that while the problems of the tribals, Adivasis, were very accurate under the British, given that the British imperial policy essentially saw the forest as sources of timber and minerals, with its dwellers as pesky savages to be supposed or evangelized. Very little of Adivasi question was raised within the context of constitutional debates in the Constituent Assembly. As a student of constitutional law, I can share with you, except 5th and 6th schedule, there is not much of a discussion. Even the 5th schedule was not subjected to the required amount of intense debate on the question concerning the tribals. Barring a few stray references, even as a great warrior of social justice, such as Baba Saheb, himself did not subject the question of justice for Adivasis to as extensive and incisive an analysis as it did of the castes themselves in this country. Nevertheless, we must remember the father of the nation, for he was forever extremely aware of the violence, explicit or implicit, that threatened any group, way of life, and their freedom to hold on to it. On being chided by Thakkar Baba, Mahatma Gandhi wrote, it was in 18th January 1942, published in the magazine Harijan. Many other causes are included in the constructive program by implication. But that cannot and should not satisfy such a humanitarian as Thakkar Baba. The Adivasis are the original inhabitants whose material position is perhaps not better than that of Harijans. He alone speaks about this. The Adivasis should have found a special place in the constructive program. This is much before the Constitution. One who hopes to construct Swaraj on the foundations of non-violence can afford to neglect even the least of India's sons. Adivasis are too numerous and counted among the least. Unquote. While there is a large literature about how Gandhian ideas helped in mobilization and organization of tribes, for instance in South Rajputana, in various national political movements, substantially less work has been done on recognizing the necessarily synergetic relationship between prevention of settler colonization of Adivasis, greed as a foundation of destructive human passions, and economic greed as a machinery for the depredation of land and the environment ultimately threatening the possibility of a more refined and civilized coexistence of human beings as a platform of nonviolence. ना हम बदलेंगे ना वो बदलेंगे, तो चलते रहते. Which brings us to the next stage of analysis of the question of justice for Adivasis in India. We again must necessarily frame this question from the context of both the history of development of the order and its mutation into predatory political economy, as well as the implications for environmental protection on the basis of co-equal rights to ecological stability. I would add the question of Adivasis rights would lie at the being center of this debate. While state-led violence in wars and bringing additional land under the plow had a severe deleterious effect on tribes and Adivasis around the world, the onset of modern mercantile state and the capitalist predatory political economy has unleashed a hunger for resources that was unimaginable in the context of largely agrarian societies that preceded. The founding principles of modern predatory state are greed for as excess of profits as can be imagined, consumption based on choices from an unimaginably vast array of potential consumables, repeated hankering for the new and ever-changing artifacts of modern life, and a repeat of these cycles as a mark of economic and moral progress. They shamelessly include even the moral also in it. This necessarily implies generation of excess and waste, and consequently immense depredation of Earth's resources, and of particular importance of gouge the earth clean, or the lands in which forest dwellers reside, as it has been noted by many scholars. The modern iterations of conflicts with the forest dwellers have again been about the resources that the paradigm of modern economic growth seeks from under feet and beds of Adivasis. ఈ వాక్యం రాసేప్పుడు వరవరరావు గారు ఎక్కడనో మాట్లాడుతుంటే ఆ సభలో నేను కూర్చొని ఎందుకో సడన్గా జ్ఞాపకం వచ్చింది రాస్తుంటే. ఎందుకు ఇంత విధ్వంసం, ఎందుకు ఇంత హింస ఆదివాసుల పట్ల అంటే ఆయన ఒక మాట అన్నాడు, ఎందుకంటే వాళ్ళ కాళ్ళ కింద ఖనిజ సంపద ఉంది అంటే he just summarized in one sentence. ఆయన వాళ్ళ కాళ్ళ కింద ఫీట్ అన్నాడు కనుక నేను దానికి ఒక పదం జోడించిన అండర్ దర్ బెడ్స్ ఆల్సో. అంటే వాడు పడుకుంటే వాడు బెడ్ కింద కూడా ఉంది కదా, ది మినరల్ వెల్త్. Therefore necessarily this conflict. While the Constituent Assembly debates were marked by a scarcity of consideration of the issue of Adivasis, the text of the Constitution itself necessarily brought the question of justice for Adivasis and the protection of their lands and forests to enable them to lead their way of life and to flourish in the same as a matter of their socio-cultural choices as an essential component of the larger question of establishment of justice, social, economic, and political as part of the national goal and project. Consequently, Article 38 and 39, that is the directive principles of the Constitution forming primordial pillars in the directive principles of state policy, should have been interpreted expansively to more fully comprehend and protect the rights of Adivasis. Yet, truth be told, the development paradigm was conceived of in a much narrower and materialistic fashion, and the age-old problem of epistemically excluding the question of justice for Adivasis was forgotten. It was not until the 42nd Amendment in 1976, of course it is a notorious amendment that was brought during the emergency. Later, to a large extent repealed by the 44th Amendment, yet certain things were retained. The word secular socialist were added by the 42nd Amendment. Thereby, we are not justifying what happened in 75-76. Introduced in the parliament by Mrs. Gandhi's government was, quote unquote, this was the first time after the independence, protection and improvement of environment and safeguarding of forests and wildlife, unquote, made a part of the central worries of the Constitution. Yet a keen observer would notice that protection of the modes of life Adivasis was only an indirect consequence and not a primordial right in itself. It was to take another 2 decades plus for the parliament to get around this in the form of scheduled tribes and other traditional forest dwellers, Recognition of Forest Rights Act 2006. Perhaps thanks to Aruna Rai and the think tank. While critics of the law, who are also avid supporters of the rights of tribals, have readily criticized the Forest Rights Act, have described it as both a victory and a betrayal. The law itself may be deemed to have been further watered down. In 2022, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change introduced a new set of forest conservative rules which virtually amended the Forest Conservation Act and violated the Forest Rights Act 2006. This amendment allows the district collectors to transfer forest lands to private companies, including mining and pharmaceutical companies, by overriding the objections of the Gram Sabhas. This has again raised the specter of elimination of the forest dwellers, rights and the continuation of the predatory form of capitalist exploitation of problems. This amendment being introduced by the regime in power in Delhi could potentially represent a wholesale attack again on the rights of forest dwellers. The powers that we already demonstrated, considerable apathy in the implementation of the act itself. There are, of course, multiple pathways from here on. Obviously, continued articulation of the Adivasi rights to their modes of life and social justice within constitutionally permitted means is a sine qua non. Equality, importantly, the idea of social justice for Adivasis, must also be located at the center of the debate regarding protection of environment. As more and more scientists are articulating, the crisis of climate change and environmental devastation cannot be forestalled. Just now somebody was talking about why not the Western Ghats? Environmental devastation cannot be forestalled by piecemeal action. It requires a complete overhaul of what is projected as the right way of life, of wasteful and extravagant consumption. We need to revert back to Gandhi, that unless we eliminate greed and desire as primordial values and seek happiness in the flourishing of human life and human relations, both between individual and groups of us, the earth will not be able to sustain any one of us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your forbearance. Before I leave, two suggestions I'll make. One, a re-look at the Constitution providing adequate safeguards so far as the rights of Adivasis are concerned, which perhaps is taken care to some extent by 5th and 6th schedule, which are specifically entrusted to the governors of the state, where they are not required to act on the aid and advice of Council of Ministers only with regard to 5th schedule. But unfortunately, the governors of the states are busy in piecemeal destruction of the Constitution of India. Therefore, they have no time. Some of them, I believe, may not be aware of the 5th schedule also. I will not be surprised. If you talk to a governor and talk something about the 5th schedule, he may ask you, what is that supposed to be? That's the only real function that is entrusted to the governor under the Constitution. Therefore, we will demand, this conference will demand, this conference of International Adivasi Day will demand, a re-look at the Constitution to provide adequate safeguard to the life, liberty and property profession of Adivasis. Two, immediately, which can be done by the Parliament, which hopefully it will not, restore the Forest Dwellers Act as it was prior to the amendment in 2022, enabling the district collector to overrule Gram Sabha. That means overrule the public opinion and provide the land to the multinational or national corporations for exploitation of mineral wealth. These two concrete suggestions, I wanted to make it today. The whole problem is, it can't be looked, that's why I said in a piecemeal or a individualistic manner. It's part of larger political, social and economic program. This predatory capitalism, handing over the country to crony capitalists, is to come to an end. Otherwise, we would not be able to find solution to the problem which we are discussing today. I remember how the people are divided among the groups. Supreme Court used one expression. Guns for the poor, tax rebates for the rich. Yesterday, if all of you have seen, I believe at least some of you have seen, Sanjay Singh, a member of parliament who represents, I think, Aam Aadmi Party, was reading a lengthy list of haircuts. What it is, its name is haircut. A company owns a 65,000 crores to a particular bank owned by Ravi. He is asked to pay 5,000 crores and 60,000 is the haircut. He gave a list of 12 to 14 companies, and the amount, these cuts, this haircut, runs into 3,46,000 crores of rupees. This is the society in which we live. Unless we understand these problems broadly, there is no point in speaking about every time about some civil rights. Civil rights do not survive by themselves. Therefore, whenever we are making a demand, whenever we are condemning an attack on the civil rights, we must have a relook as to what is going on, what was intended, what was the spirit, what was the morality of the Constitution, and what we have achieved today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.